Chapter 8 Snatched and Dispatched. Evening drew on, and the tea tent was struck. As darkness climbed the trees, their cheeping grew louder, and a silky sighing came from on high. The roustabouts had long since wound up the clockwork yacht. Now it had sailed away through the mysterious mist, low in the water, as Prince Bruno Havarti was filled to the brim with scone crumbs and fresh strawberries. I was myself more than ready for dinner. The Ewe-Mice mess hall was deep down among the roots of a tree that had undermined the ruined potting shed, and so it was rather low-ceilinged and noisy. I was hungry as a Havarti, but the meal hadn't been up to much, though long. A shred of undertoned venison, then foot of rabbit. The pudding was a beetle flambé with a flaming sauce that looked like butterscotch, but wasn't. Still, it was very well served by mice orderlies in paper hats back and forth to the kitchen. I'd never been served before, and quite liked it. Following the cheese and biscuit crumbs, we were all upstanding to toast Queen Victoria on this, the eve of her Diamond Jubilee. "To her human majesty!" we squeaked, whole-hearted and full-throated. As the orderlies cleared our crumbs, I wondered when I'd eaten last. Back in the mews, it must have been, in the manger, scarfing up the oats and carrot bits from Peg's breakfast. How long ago? How far away? It made me think. "I ought really to be getting back to the mews and my horse," I remarked to Ian. "It will be parade time in the morning before we know it." They were serving the coffee now in scooped-out acorns. "I'm quite determined to have a word with Queen Victoria about who I might be. I'll be very grateful for any insights Her Majesty cares to share." I don't know how much I myself believed in this scheme. It was a ramshackle plan with more holes in it than a Swiss cheese. But you know how you are at that age. And it helped to say it out loud to Ian. It made it more real. "Really?" he said, watching me over his steaming acorn. "Are you under the impression that you can communicate with a human?" "She isn't human. Didn't Ian know that? Her powers are magical and unexplained, and a touch of her hand will cure warts." "My dear chap," Ian said, "I thought that old warts nonsense went out with Queen Anne. Queen Victoria is quite human, all too human, and nothing whatever to do with you." I thought this a bit harsh on both the Queen and me, but Ian wasn't finished. "Besides, you are not free to scamper off to the mews or anywhere else. You have hardly been a Yule-Mouse long enough to earn leave. In any case, you and I are on sentry duty tonight. We have a stretch of garden wall to walk. Our names are on the roster." The roster? Really? I didn't see a roster. Still, if Ian said so, it must be true. He and I were among the Ewe-Mice standing around outside under the foliage, resplendent in our red and gold. A few carried their acorns into the open air. Very convivial, Ewe-Mice. You don't wear your sword to dinner. It isn't done. Dueling could break out between the courses. So now we were strapping on our scabbards. Time drew nigh to relieve the Ewe-Mice, finishing their watch on our stretch of the wall. Not a moonbeam winked in the inky night, but in the distance Buckingham Palace was lit up like a birthday cake. Gas flames flared at every window. Music wafted over the rippling lake. A grand state dinner at the palace seemed to be ending. The royal guests were spilling out onto the terrace around the urns. Queen Victoria would have dined more quietly, and was no doubt tucked up in her bed by now. Being on her last legs, she could hardly attend a party that spilled out onto the terrace. It took a block and tackle to get her into her carriage, as we know, and an act of Parliament to get her out again. All these royal thoughts crowded my head, and so my mind wandered unwisely. How smooth and manicured the park between the far-off palace and here. Smooth and new-mown and deadly. Being out in the open, even on a moonless night, is no place for a mouse. Owls, you see. Owls with their awful wingspan and flat yellow cat's eyes, their beaks like guillotines. I've never seen an owl, but we are born knowing, we mice. Besides, many a mouse has been devoured to his toenails by an owl he never saw. They are that quick, that heartless. Under the overhang of a holly bush, Ian spoke into my ear. "I must just drop by the latrine before we go on duty. Carry on, and I'll meet you by the wall." How offhand Ian was. Cut across that bit of open country. It wouldn't do to get tangled up in a net again when you can't see where you step. You fall over, you know. Mind how you go." Then Ian went, and I started across that open bit of park between the holly bush and the wall. I dropped down on all fours for quick and easy movement, though my sword dragged the grass. I was no sooner in the open when a thought gave me pause. Ian had said my name was on the duty roster. But how could that be when I didn't have a name? How? I was this close to the wall when I was seized in steely grips beneath both arms and jerked rudely up into the night. I kept running for a moment, paddling in the air, but then my feet and hands hung helplessly, and the wind rushed between my toes. I don't know why my heart didn't give out. I don't know how I've lived to tell it. It was all far worse than being snared in that butterfly net. I squealed. Now I was higher than the wall, higher than the treetops. I squealed like anything for Ian, but had he been the one to lead me into this terrible mouse snapping? Was he part of some great plot? And was I hanging from an owl? Oh, don't let it be an owl. But I'd never before been hung by the armpits from an owl, so how could I know? We were over the lake now. I saw ripples silvered by the palace lights, and stopped struggling. If I was dropped now, I'd be drowned like a rat. We wheeled high in endless sky over London, over everything earthly, and we were turning now toward the palace, snatched and dispatched. Were these my final moments? But somehow I didn't think owl. An owl would have had my head off by now. And I didn't think beak. Somehow I thought of teeth instead. Rows and rows of chattering teeth. And I seemed suspended from not one creature, but two, flying in close formation. 2 heads seemed to flank mine, 2 heads, too close to see. 4 ears, nowhere near as big as mine, cocked against the night. They were winged creatures, or we wouldn't be up here. I sensed the throb of wings beating with a silken sound, susurrating like the treetops. As we swooped, eyes seemed to glow on either side, red as rubies, paired and peering, pointing our way through all this rushing sky. Yes, there were 2 of them. I felt the beat of their separate hearts beneath the beating of their wings. My heart was in my mouth. They had an odd smell, too, and oddly familiar. Mildew and undigested bugs. I gathered they weren't going to eat me in flight. They were saving me for later. Time was running out, as it does with mice. But quicker. We swooped nearer the palace now, slanting in above the terrace. The cheeping of my captors bounced off the palace walls. My scabbard came loose. My sword fell away. I felt it go. So now I was unarmed, on top of everything else. The palace party lit the night from below. A babble of human voices rose to join the rush of wings, the steady cheep. We were making straight for those blank attic windows that frame a deeper darkness than the night. The attics dead ahead. The terrace below, candlelit and ablaze with diamonds, and far too many humans. A fall from this height would do me in, but we were about to land on an attic windowsill. I peered into the moments ahead. 2 winged and webbed creatures, hunched high in the attic rafters, picking over my bones in perfect privacy. No, I wouldn't have it. I must take my fate into my own hands. Now it was time to make my smallness work for me. Somehow I made myself even smaller still. My shriveling arms slipped out of my sleeves. Down I dropped, slick as a whistle, out of my uniform and the grasp of my webby abductors. We mice live by quick wits and pure instinct, or you wouldn't be reading this. Okay, so here he is. These are the people outside the palace on the courtyard. And here's the animal that's got him. And he slipped out of his uniform so that he could slip out, and the animal was still holding on to his uniform. But he fell. They flew on, my captors, clutching my U-Mouse uniform. I caught only a glimpse of red and gold, and wondered one last time if Aunt Marigold had sewn it. But now I was tumbling. tail over teacup, into the midst of royalty gathered for the Jubilee. I dropped like a furry stone, my tail making one last inquiry of the unforgiving sky. And that is the end of chapter 8 and the end of part 2. So the next chapter starts part 3. Have a great day.